if we don't change, we're always going to leave people behind. So how can we truly create the conditions for all learners, all people in an organization to flourish? The leaders who are going to move organizations forward are the ones that are in the trenches with the teachers day in and day out. They make difficult decisions. And then what are we doing to ensure that we're providing teachers with absolutely what they need to flourish as teachers?
This is a new venture. We are doing something new today. We are going truly global as well. Because I'm joined by Andy Vasily from the Run Your Life podcast. And Andy, you are, whereabouts in the world are you?
Well, I'm based in Antwerp, Belgium for work and living life. But I'm currently in Budapest, Hungary, doing some consulting work here, working with the American School in the city, which is a fantastic school. And you know, I had approached you, must have been a couple months ago, because I know you're doing great work with your own podcast. And I pitched the idea of doing this joint podcast because I felt it would bring value to the listeners. We both have different perspectives. You know, you just shared your kind of 7 themes. I shared some themes I'm interested in. We looked for overlap. Yep. So I thought this would be a very interesting way. I haven't done many joint podcasts like this, so it's new to me as well. So usually we do the introduction and all of that. So we're just flying with this introduction. But no, I thought we would do really good work together and having a conversation that we put out there and to provoke thinking around what's possible in education. And that's what I really try to focus on in my work.
Amazing. We've had back and forward conversations, haven't we? And obviously across LinkedIn and we got introduced to each other by a mutual friend in Mark Ryan. In Abu Dhabi. So shout out to Mark. So thank you very much. And we've had this conversation for a while and both being very, very busy and finding this time slot. And I appreciate, obviously we are thousands of miles apart, but through the wonders of technology, able to have this conversation and bring to both of our audiences something new, something unique in a joint podcast, bringing 2 podcast channels together, the Run Your Life podcast and the International Classroom podcast. And I'm really excited to see where this conversation goes. And it's very different for us because we're both normally we like to be organized in terms of what we do and how we structure it. And this is a flying by the seat of your pants type of thing, isn't it? In terms of where the conversation goes today. Yeah.
But when we look at that, let's just double click on that. And what comes up for me is transdisciplinary learning, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, my audience, I have a lot of educators listening to this. When I say this, I mean my podcast, a lot of leaders from different fields, a lot of athletes, but to me, regardless of what it is we do in life, we take these overarching concepts and themes and they're applicable in anything that we do in life, right? So even if somebody from the business world is listening to this or somebody from the banking world, whatever it is listening to this, hopefully they can draw on some of the themes we're talking about in terms of the conditions necessary for people to truly thrive in their learning, but also thrive in the way that they work with others to bring out their best. So there's some themes that transcend, you know, for both of us that I hope the listeners, regardless of what they do, can pull on some of those threads to apply in their own life. So I just wanted to drop that in.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you ever so much. Like you said at the start, we've kind of pulled together some themes that we think are going to resonate with both sets of audiences. And the first one that I pulled out, even though it seems like such a long time ago, was the learning loss due to COVID-19. We've got a generation now that are coming through, for me, still in full-time education, excuse me, would be, let's say, these year 11 students, grade 10 students who are coming up to a series of exams in May, who are 16-year-olds, 15, 16-year-olds who, in 2020, when we had this, they were probably at the start of their year 7 journey or just finishing year 6. So the end of primary for us. And it's interesting now that we've got this data, and I want to start with a scenario in terms of versus urgency and sustainability within this, because we've got post-pandemic data, assessment data that's just about to come through. And we can potentially say that there's going to be a significant learning loss. We're 5 years through to this now, but from a school leadership perspective, let's just say for this case, you've got some of these leadership team who are divided on what to do. Some want immediate intervention plans. Others worry about overloading teachers and students with, right, how are we going to get them to the grades they should be at for these exams that are coming up? Like, what would be your advice? What is your take on this data dilemma and how you approach it from a coaching perspective and a leadership perspective?
Yeah, that's a good question. The first thing that comes up for me is really thinking about the realities that we all face during that time. So when you say learning loss, we all experienced that. There was all something that we lost during that time. If we go back to the early days during COVID when we were in lockdown, I still think back to that time, and it was just a very strange dynamic. It was a strange feeling, an unknown feeling that we all experienced as we went into, lockdown and then trying to figure everything out. But with that came gains as well, right? Gains of being together with your family and finding solo time to work on projects that we had put aside, So I think for a lot of the young people, yes, there was definitely some learning loss there and some gaps. But at the same time, there was a lot that was gained through the experience with bringing families together. So in doing the work with leadership teams, it's like, what are the realities that we face? And being as transparent as possible with not figuring out what we think is the right answer, but figuring out the realities of the situation and bringing all minds together to try to figure out how best to address it and to learn that there are things we're going to have to let go of. We're going to have to let go of things that we have no control over, but we're also going to have to let go of maybe potential expectations that we have based on a world without COVID. But now we're faced with the world with COVID and the consequences that that's had. So I guess that's a long way of saying open, transparent communication and really understanding that we all have to come together to try to figure out what's best in moving forward, make the decisions necessary that we have to make, live with those decisions, collect more data on did we make the right decision? And if we didn't, forgive ourselves, but know that we had the best of intentions, right? In trying to figure out this issue. So what comes up for you in terms of your own question?
I think from my side, it's about just rethinking how we approach learning. I think when we see and people talk about a learning loss and the gaps that come into this, and you really hit the nail on the head there in terms of what we gained and actually that ability to take a step back and get a broader perspective and go, hang on a minute, what we've always assumed that needed to happen in education and needed to happen for learning to take place, it doesn't. And that has had an impact on the technology use, sometimes for better, not always. But I think it's also given us an opportunity to completely rethink about how we learn, what we learn, definitely. And I think whilst also contemplating this, I think with the influx of AI and technology as well, as we mentioned, that's also given us another thing to bring into the mix about how do we approach learning, for these students in general moving forward and start to reimagine what it could be. And that requires us to have these conversations about, even if it's just like the learning environment. We've seen in the last few years some wonderful online schools pop up and have been accredited in different UK systems as well. Some international ones. So we've got things like the School of Humanities. Amazing. We've got things like Minerva that's come up that are doing wonderful things online. Excuse me. For students who the traditional bricks and mortar and 8 o'clock till 4 o'clock doesn't work for. And I think that in itself allows us as educators and leaders more freedom to kind of go, hang on a minute, I can be more innovative and more creative. I can give teachers more leeway to discover what works best. And I think with that, it brings us to the question then about assessments, and that's what was the start of the question, really. These exam boards, May, June for IB, UK students around the world and other exam boards. It's a big time for examinations. That's the question really of, are they still fit for purpose? Are the types of exams we do fit for purpose? Because that drives the type of learning, the pressure we put on learning. And I think if we continue to have these conversations for that and explore the best possibilities, the best pathways, and be open-minded enough to go, look, we tried it, didn't work, let's try a different approach, and have students at the forefront and teachers teaching workload as well at the forefront. I think we're going to start to see some shifts, continued shifts, some conversations taking place for the betterment of education, for the betterment of students and teachers. But I think, as I say, we have to be at the forefront. We have to be at that apex, driving the trials, the trying these things, rather than just talking a lot and paying a lip service to it. I think we want teachers and leaders really there driving this forward and collecting the data of, hey, we've tried this. Did this work? Did this not work? Here's the evidence, and to start to be evidence informed about the way we approach learning more so now.
Yeah. And I think you said it, like being student centered. And sometimes we can lose sight of that. We can always get caught up in our heads. A lot of leadership teams get caught up in their heads and being overly analytical. And then at the end of the day, backing it up, taking a pause and saying, who are we doing this for? We're doing this for the students, and so how can we help the students thrive? And one of my kind of curiosities right now is I'm on the leadership team at the Antwerp International School. Great school, small school. The school's not trying to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. They're happy with their 350 kids. And if we get to 400, awesome. But it's that idea of really what can we do to think ahead to try to serve the needs of the kids? And I think a lot of schools are in the same position. So if schools don't change, they will become obsolete. With the advent of AI and, COVID kicking in, and then realizing that you go back to that learning loss thing, how many students, young people gained during that time? They found their rhythm. They found who they really are because school wasn't serving that need, right? And now that they were learning at home, they were thriving socially and emotionally because schools oftentimes don't provide the conditions for all learners to excel in that regard. I was in Mozambique, Africa, delivering a workshop a couple weeks ago. And in my workshops, I always stress that this workshop, the theme of my workshops are human connection. Yep. I don't care if you take one idea from this workshop, but if you take away 4 or 5 relationships, you have no idea how those are going to serve you in the future. How staying connected, you will learn and grow and have opportunities, And on the second day, I shared 4 stories from my podcast, four different people that I interviewed that have gone on to do extraordinary things. One is Hamish Brewer, an amazing principal in the U.S. who is considered to be the skateboarding principal. Oh, yeah. You know who he is, right? Yeah. And then Tracy Edwards, who is from the UK. She was the first female captain to captain an all-female crew in the Whitbread Around the World race and finished second. A third one, Morris Irvin Jr., who grew up in really tough conditions, went on to become a nonviolent communication trainer. And then the fourth one was Fritzi Horstman, who's an author, and she also does a lot of work with prisoners. And she did this powerful video called Step Inside the Circle, where she works with inmates to acknowledge their trauma and the greatness within. So these 4 people have gone on to do amazing work in the world. And I said, okay, what's the common thread? They both dropped out of, or they all dropped out of school, hated school, were bullied, were ridiculed, found no purpose in school, and then found their own meaning in life later in life, And I said, what a shame that schools couldn't provide that for them. So why I'm going on this long-winded description of what I talked about in the Mozambique conference is there's something there. Like if we don't change, we will become obsolete. And if we don't change, we are not going to meet the needs. One of the things you want to talk about was equality in education. or inequality. And if we don't change, we're always going to leave people behind. So how can we truly create the conditions for all learners, all people in an organization to flourish? So it's become a hot topic of mine that I discuss. So what comes up for you when I share all of that?
Yeah, inequality is something is a word we hear. I'm hearing a lot of equity, equality, and often associated with AI, access to technology. But I am an international school teacher, and I teach in Dubai. For those people from your podcast listening, maybe don't know me, and I've been here for 10 years now. And near enough every school in Dubai is what I'm going to class as a private school, meaning from the way I describe a private school, is it's fee paying. And the schools are run as businesses, from one of the better word, because they're fee paying. And we have this in Dubai, we have these profit and these non-for-profit schools. And it's the same, and you will come across these yourself as you move through the Middle East, as you move across in terms of Asia, China, Hong Kong, those types of schools. And what comes up for me then is I was educated in a state school, so a government-funded school in the UK, in the West Midlands, where a lot of my friends were, and I was very fortunate in the one that I went to was a good school, good sports, and not all of them are like that, but it makes me think of my own upbringing and where I am now about the private versus public or state school debate, where you've got, where I am, these private schools who have state-of-the-art facilities. We can utilize AI. To some extent, we have relatively small class sizes. Behavior is not a problem. We're there to teach. Parents are generally very present. And that kind of ties in a little bit to the partnerships that you were talking about, because it's about partnerships within the community. It's about building partnerships with parents. And there's research out there that shows that developing those parental partnerships early on in a child's education has a drastic impact and positive impact on their education they have. But you've then got these state schools, public schools around the world who are struggling with overcrowding. We've got outdated resources. Like it makes me think and really kind of introspectively question, like, how do we create educational reform to generate equity, and that for me is a big challenge, because one of my sort of core beliefs, and this comes from the chimp paradox, I think it was, when we talk about that. And I would say, life's not fair. It's one of those things that, my kids say it's not fair. And my instant response is, well, life's not fair. And in some way, it's a belief of mine. It's not something I value, but it's something I believe in because I see it consistently. But on the other hand, from an educational perspective, how do we generate a different belief that, well, hang on a minute, education should be fairer? Or is that a pipe dream? Is that actually something that is a non-reality? It's a non-starter. That's kind of what it makes me think about. And I don't necessarily have an answer, but it's that question that's driving it.
So should education be fair? What was that question again?
Yeah, it's that. Should education be fair?
So then going back to, I told you I wanted to talk about this idea of entry points to learning. And that's why I'm so passionate about the work that I do working with schools and teachers and educational leaders, is like, how are we truly creating the conditions for all learners to find their entry point, which means teachers too, which means when we run PD, are we actually serving all the teachers' needs at the start of the year by bringing, 80 teachers together for this one common training? Even though it's well-intentioned and the training might align to the big rock of the school or big rocks of the school, are we actually honoring their learning styles? Are we allowing for multiple means of expression and engagement and representation of learning? So I get really, I don't want to say irritated, but I do get irritated when I see schools waste teachers' times in terms of professional development. So when you think of leadership teams thinking about next year, for example, and making all the decisions about what the schools or what the teachers need to learn and what we're going to offer them, it comes from a good place, but very rarely do do schools allow teachers to co-construct what that professional development looks like? They might do it through, professional learning groups, and you can pick an inquiry and all of that, but there's so much more to it, right?
Yeah.
So now we back it into the classroom setting. You're a classroom teacher. So I was a single subject teacher for years. So how am I honoring my students? And am I creating the conditions for all of my learners to find an entry point? Well, that means there's a lot that I need to let go of in order to do that. So if I'm going to create true equality, then I need to differentiate the learning experiences and allow time for exploration for students to find their entry point. And that's a lot of the work that I do stresses that. And it provokes, like I get pushback a lot saying, oh, we get it in elementary, but when they get to middle school, they have to learn A, B, C, and D. There is no choice. I get that. Inquiry comes with constraints. We can't just let them do whatever they want. But at the same time, there are many things we can do to open up learning in a way that allows all learners to find an entry point. And when we get that right, John Hattie, the researcher from New Zealand, talks about this concept of every young learner deserves a year's growth for a year's schooling. And if we do that, we've won. But we set kids up for failure by demanding what their entry point is and what their exit point should be. Right. Yeah. So going back to your inequality, it's something for me that I'm really passionate about. I think of myself as a young learner that really struggled in school and struggled to find purpose. And so I see in me a lot of the kids that I try to impact in my work, a lot of the young learners. But so, yeah, what comes up when you think of that idea?
I was kind of really honed in on the concept of PD, and it's something that's been a bugbear of mine for years. And like my interest has always been professional development, and I think it's probably one of the hardest jobs that teacher will take on. It seems to be when any aspiring teacher wants to go into a senior level of leadership, I think near enough all of them want to somehow get into the professional development, the teaching and learning side, and having dipped my toe into that, and I've got a friend who does it and multiple friends who do it, they honestly say, it's the hardest role to have, because you are responsible for so many individuals' professional development. And we've all been there where we sit in PD sessions and have that exasperated look on our face.
Yeah, you'd rather stick a steak knife in your eye than sit there.
You'd just be like this. And it's super, super hard. And listening to that, it's this concept of, if I can pronounce his surname, Patrick Lencioni.
Yeah.
If you come across the
functional teams.
Yeah. And it's kind of got me thinking a little bit about that in terms of when we talk about commitment. But the concept there is about, why would I disengage from professional development or this initiative, for example? And it's that, well, have I been part of the conversation? And I think when it comes to this concept of entry points, whether it's, and I'm talking about teachers, because again, one of the things I spoke about was the teacher shortage, teacher training. But if I don't have a say in my own teacher training, my own development, and I'm leaving it completely up to you. If I don't like what you're selling, as it were, I'm going to disengage. And that is then an issue about the commitment that I'm bringing into this team, that I'm bringing into the school environment. And I feel like my voice then, well, where is my voice? Where is that voice in part of the school culture, the school community, for those simple things that I have a say over how I want to develop, or how I want to learn these things. And it almost feels to me that sometimes we approach staff professional development in a way that we tell teachers not to teach in. Well, you can't teach like that. That's not giving agency. That's not going to allow them access. That's not scaffolded. That isn't. If I was observing a teacher teach and they didn't do any of those things, we'd almost be outraged and go, "Where's your evidence base? Why aren't you doing this?" And yet, when it comes to professional development, we don't go, "Hang on a minute." Like, and here's, I kind of like this. I wrote my master's dissertation was themed by this, but about andragogy. How many of these professional, people who are leading professional development have an idea of what andragogy is, which is how adults learn. Yeah. And then a wonderful Joyce Matthews, wonderful lady in Scotland, introduced me to the term hootagogy, which I'd never come across previously.
Hooter, huh?
Hootagogy. So you have pedagogy, andragogy, hootagogy.
I was thinking Hooters, the pub, the grill. I was like, what? I'll remember that word forever now.
You'll remember that. There you go. Dual coding. We'll just flash a picture up. Everyone's going to remember that one. But that's what it's brought me to in terms of how do we get staff voice? How do we get, more staff, or allowing staff the opportunity to have their voices heard so you get greater buy-in? I think that's an issue a lot of schools face because they don't provide opportunities for that to take place. And there's so many, focusing on that book, like then you've got an absence of trust. Do you not trust your staff to then do this? Are you then going to incite conflict? All the key things that come up to this accountability, the result side of things, because we all know what happens in teaching. And again, back to results driven. But if my results aren't good enough in the summer, then I'm going to get scrutinized. They're going to come and look at my teaching and learning. And I'm going to go, well, you didn't provide me. I can then turn around and go, well, if you've not provided me with the teaching and learning that I need, then who does that rest? Is that my fault? Because I'm busy doing the teaching, the marking, the planning, or is that then on you as the leadership team because you've not recognized my individual needs?
Yeah, and that's what, that's great, a great example. And there are schools are beginning to try, I shouldn't say beginning to, they've been trying to address this. So this goes back to leadership and the best leaders out there. So when we think of leadership as being an arrow, okay. So you have the stem of the arrow where that'll be 70% of leaders that are, they're competent, they've chosen leadership for the right reasons. But they're a little bit stuck in their ways, where you take the arrowhead is going to be the other 30% or 20% that are kind of the arrowhead of leadership. Like they're pretty good. Then you take the tip of the arrow, that 1% or 5% of leaders who are just incredible at what they do. And going back to our conversation at the start of this podcast around transdisciplinary learning, and it doesn't matter who's listening to this, hopefully they can pull ideas from. Well, that tip of the arrow, they understand the importance of, autonomy and agency and the science of motivation. And they're trying to figure this out. They're trying to figure out, how can I inspire my leadership team to go out, be on the same page, use language in the same way, empower those who they lead to kind of have the autonomy needed to develop themselves and provide the support needed. So some of these schools are really trying to figure that out. And like I said, they might do it through professional learning communities 4 times a year, but then the rest of the year, you got to do A, B, and C. Some are doing a little more than that, but, it does go back to that idea of imagine what it would be like as a leadership team when you're planning next year's calendar to say, let's just have placeholders. Yeah. Let's not fill that in. And let's really be open and transparent with teaching staff and say, we, for the first time, have not mandated what you're going to have to do in terms of PD next year, especially on PD days and stuff like that. We're leaving it open because we are going to organically create that together. Now, the non-negotiables are, it has to be related to school vision and mission. It has to be related to the big rocks of the school, and it has to be related to enhanced student learning. Okay, so now how can we use this time in a way that's productive to you, that makes you better at what you do? Because ultimately, you are the ones on the ground doing the work every day. We need to honor you better. I've never seen a school do it. Schools have to fill in all those gaps a year ahead of time, and then come hell or high water, they can't. No, it's in the calendar. We can't pivot. We can't adjust. So I just go back to that idea. It is actually possible but create some ground rules for engagement with this process, and make sure the constraints are in place that make it about school vision, mission, and enhanced student learning. And you're going to win. You will win because the teachers will have ownership over this journey.
Yeah. Sorry. I'm in a bad cough today.
No problem.
I was writing some things down as you went through that. Because the one thing, there's a few, but the things that stood out to me there was about vision and mission. And I always find it interesting when you go to the teachers who are at the coalface, as it were, and you say, hey, tell me about your school's vision and mission. What do you think the general output, what do you think the answer is for that?
I don't know. Huh?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And that for me is the biggest takeaway when you're thinking about, like, at the moment we've got spring break that comes up in a week. And after that, term 3 for us here is like, right, reflection and new curriculum planning, because you're thinking about the year ahead, thinking about getting the curriculums designed, all these different things that come with it when you're at game time. But when you're designing, from my side, when designing this curriculum, it's like, how can I make the curriculum tie into the vision and mission of the school? And if you've got all these teachers that don't know what the vision and mission is, it's like you're struggling to then get any form of cohesion. Like we talked about the leaders, how do I get them saying the same things? And well, if you don't know what the vision and mission is from the top down, how am I meant to plan and deliver content that not just obviously from a content perspective, the knowledge part of students develop, but then the character of the students develop? Because, it might be that we want them to be aspirational. Okay, well, what does that look like as a scientist? How do I get them to be aspirational as a characteristic, not just, doing harder work? What if mine is about then, I can't think of a different one. I'm thinking of my previous school ones because it was clear. It was enjoy, aspire, achieve. It was very clear. It was written on the walls. So we had that. So, okay, well, now that's a clear one, enjoyment. How do I get kids to enjoy science? How do I design a curriculum that has an element of enjoyment to it? Well, I need to do some more practicals, because all kids enjoy practicals. I've never known a kid who goes, I don't want to do, it might be a heart dissection. They'll be like, no, I don't want to do that dissection. Don't want to do a fish head dissection. No, I don't want to. There's some, but general practicals. I've never known a kid in chemistry who's like, I don't want to blow anything up. I don't want to set something on fire today. It's like, every kid wants to do that because all these adults still want to do it. Well, welcome to the International Classroom Podcast, proudly sponsored by Lumio by Smart Technologies. Lumio transforms your lessons into engaging, interactive experiences that enhance collaboration and student participation. You can bring your lessons to life effortlessly with Lumio, empowering teachers and inspiring learners. And Lumio really emphasizes collaboration. Speaking of that, let's get on with our episode. Yeah. But if I don't know what that vision and mission is, it's like, it makes it very difficult, doesn't it, to be able to create a consistent curriculum and culture within a school that allows me to really develop that characteristic part of the student.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think I go back to this quote from my mentor, which is, culture is an artifact of the relationships we have. Right? So culture is the artifact of the relationships we have. So what is the culture of the school? Is the culture of the school one that we're having these conversations, where we're really trying to figure it out and we're trying to build trusting relationships with our students in order to help them flourish in their own unique ways. So at the end of the day, when I go and I train teachers, and not all kids are going to like everything, but they have to experience everything. They have to experience the sciences, the maths, the languages. They have to experience PE, music, visual arts. They have to they have to know how to navigate the library, not library space, all of that. They're not going to fall in love with everything. But at the end of the day, if I'm teaching music, for example, then I sure as hell hope that regardless if the student doesn't fall in love with music, I hope that I can create the conditions for them to be engaged in music, to be engaged in PE, to be engaged in numbers, to be engaged in text, to be engaged in language. That's my job. And the only way that I can do that is by making it relational. And you and I talked about this idea of trust, and and how we can create the conditions for psychological safety and trust, and to allow students to find what they're passionate about, but to also help them understand that along this journey, you still have to learn other things. So then it comes down to how the teacher's delivering that. And this is, over the years, Mark, Ryan, and I have talked a lot about this idea of autonomy and agency and what it actually looks like. And it's been amazing to see his work over the past, 5 or 6 years, and to see his role really take off. And, I think is this his first year at your school or second?
No, me and Mark, we're not at schools together. So Mark is first year. Okay. He's now PYP coordinator at, I can't think what the GEM school is in Abu Dhabi.
Were you at his last school?
No.
Oh, okay. You're at a different school.
We're at different schools. Mark is Abu Dhabi based. I'm Dubai based.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. Gotcha.
But STEM is the connection for us.
Yeah. And that's it. So it's been amazing to see his journey and what he's done, going back to like really doubling down on relationships. And going back to that quote, culture is an artifact of the relationships we have. So when you walk through the school, any school, you can see really quickly what kind of culture there is by watching the way people interact with one another or avoid interacting with one another.
Yeah.
Are they using aggressive language? Are they using supportive language? Like, you can learn a lot from that. So,
because there's a question in there really from my side is, how do we then create schools that have that, sense of belonging and collaboration? Because obviously it's one of those, we see a lot, people talking a lot about culture and psychological safety. But from your experience, when you're going to work with leaders and you're seeing these schools, like for me, the question that stands out there is the how. I know why I need to do this, but how do I go about doing it? What would be the first kind of steps that you are pointing people into to go, like, this is how you go about starting this, and then this is how you go about maintaining and developing it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I also want to know what you think about that. I would say it begins with radical candor. There's a great book, Radical Candor by Kim Scott. And it begins by creating the conditions around the table with the leadership team. What conversations are we actually going to have here? And how are we going to hold each other accountable and hold each other to high standards? So as a leadership team, if we are not on the same page, you still want to create some uniqueness in the way that people, individuality and leadership styles. But at the end of the day, you have to be connected and be in agreement on how we're going to use language to empower teachers. And what are the fundamental philosophies we're going to bring forward to empower teachers to do their best work? Some leadership teams push through agendas and don't take a pause at all. They can't even take a breath because everything is about, we've got to talk about this. Check, we did that. What about this? What about that? What about that? And very rarely do they put on the brakes to say, how are we actually doing here? What has been I've been on a leadership team where we have not had those, I'm not talking my current school, but where we haven't had those discussions, so if we're not willing as leaders to say, how am I doing? How am I showing up? What's been my biggest challenges over the past week trying to inspire teachers to do their best work? Am I showing up as my best self? And if I'm not, what's getting in the way? It might seem like fluffy bullshit to a lot of people, but I think at the end of the day, if you're willing to invest in those conversations, then you're bringing out the best in the leadership team and equipping them with the skills necessary to lean on each other and be vulnerable when they're struggling, when they're having this burden on their shoulders to do so much, to get the teachers, all on the same page, So I think it begins with the leadership team and being willing to have the conversations necessary to figure out what's really going on, and then what are we doing to ensure that we're providing teachers with absolutely what they need to flourish as teachers, So to me, it starts with the leadership team and the willingness to have difficult conversations and to look at each other in the eye and say, I'm struggling. I sometimes struggle. I don't know how to deal with my role at times, whatever it is, Yeah. So what about you?
So I was, as you were talking there, I wrote a few things down. And then one of the books that I've kind of really resonated with me over the last 6 months, as it were, was through Rebel Ideas, Matthew Syed.
Oh, I haven't heard of that.
It's a really good book about cognitive diversity. And from my side, I think one of the things that we often can fall into, and I've seen this throughout my time, is that previously leaders promote leaders who are very similar to themselves.
Yeah.
It's that salesman, you buy from people you like. You want to work with people you like. And for me, I have a very clear what is professional Alex and what's personal Alex. And those lines can become very blurred. I'm very fortunate with the head of my school at the moment is a phenomenal leader who has, and I knew him personally beforehand, and I've seen his also professional side, two different things. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really good way to have in terms of this professional versus personal. And you want cognitive diversity. And that's the point I want to get to. I want different perspectives, different backgrounds, different thinking styles. And I think if you want to challenge the assumptions, which is the thing I wrote down from what you were saying, it's like you need to have people that you are happy to be in conflict with. Mm-hmm. and not take it personally. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, comes from leaders being able to say and actually challenge their assumptions and go into that and say, right, we're going to have a conversation about this. And actually, I'm going to, everything you say, I'm going to challenge and pre-warn people, but I'm going to be the heretic. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that I'm seeing more of at the moment is this kind of heretic style of leadership in that. And again, Dan Fitzpatrick was talking about it in his book.
Yeah.
About even using AI. It's like having a heretic there, having someone who's going to give you the opposing point of view. I think if you went into that and go, look, today, guys, or for this term, I'm going to be the heretic. I'm going to give you the opposing point of view, and to get you to think, not just to be a pain in the arse or whatever you want to call me afterwards, but it's to challenge our assumptions about these things. And I think if you can do that and people then get used to it, I don't think people are ever going to get comfortable with it, but there is that saying about being, getting comfortable, being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But that's a starting point because then, and then you can flip that on its head and go, we're all in this together. You can challenge mine. You can, not in a divisive way, not in an aggressive way, but then we start to think about, well, how do I ask those questions? How do I ask challenging questions? Because that's what leaders should do. We need to ask challenging questions and challenge people's ideas, but at the same time, we need to be able then to provide answers to those challenging questions. And if I'm not being challenged in my own thinking, if I'm not being asked to really deeply reflect on it, then it's just going to sit there, and we could be sat in these echo chambers of just reverberating the same ideas and the same belief system.
Praising each other for just not challenging, but praising. But I want to get a book in my bag right here because I want to read a quote that resonates with what you just said. Okay, so thanks. I just grabbed the book. I wanted to share a quote because when you were talking about this idea of creating the conditions and having important conversations, the book I wanted to share is The Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday. And it's brilliant because every day there is, 2 or 3 paragraphs of insight that he shares based on Stoic philosophy. And March 14th, the entry was called Self-Deception is Our Enemy. And the quote he uses is from Epictetus, the ancient Greek philosopher, who says, "It is impossible for a person to begin to learn what he thinks he already knows." Mm. So when you talk about challenging assumptions and all of that, if we're not willing to go there, or if we are not willing to move from our stance, or if we're too entrenched with what we think is right, we've shut ourselves down from all possibilities and all potential learning, Yeah. And Nelson Mandela talks about the greatest leadership lesson he ever learned was from his father, growing up. And his father was, a well-respected tribesman, and the villages would bring their elders together and they would have a conversation about how best to move the region forward. And Nelson Mandela, his father, always made sure that everybody sat in a circle. And his father was always the last to speak. And he always told Nelson, whatever you do in life, always be the last to speak. Because you may think you know everything, and you may think that what you have to say is most important, especially if you become a leader's son one day. Always be the last to speak, because you may find out that when you hear everybody and it comes back to you, you might not have to say a word because everybody has already said everything. So you imagine that the director of a school who, in a leadership meeting, everybody's looking to the director or the principal to have the final word. And then when it comes to them, they feel this pressure to, okay, well, I'm leader. I have to speak now, and I have to share and blow off air, to share my thoughts, because that's what I'm supposed to do as a leader. Imagine it gets to the person and they say, actually, everything has already been said. Thank you, everybody, so much for sharing your wisdom. And imagine what Nelson said is, there were so many times when he was the last to speak, when it got back to him and his opinion changed.
Yeah.
Right? So what you're describing is not only about challenging assumptions, but putting ourselves in the position to be the last to speak.
Yeah. And there's a phrase, it's kind of the way it's been saying at the moment is, you hear a lot of people say this now, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And I think, if again, I looked it up, it's impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows. I think that's in the book, isn't it? Seneca.
Yeah.
And it's very much that one, isn't it? It's that, how do you challenge assumptions? Well, you've got to be open-minded. And I've heard, I think I didn't realize where it came from, but that very same point you made about being the last person to speak in the leadership part enables you to hear everyone else's ideas. And therefore, if you're open-minded, yours may then change because you've gathered all of the information.
Exactly.
And that's a really key point. And it's translated to the, you don't know what you don't know, in my opinion. And therefore it's the idea of the opposite of that is ego. And we, I think the part is ego is the enemy. I think it talks about, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And so therefore, when you get to leadership, it's always questioning the why. Why do you want to lead? Why do you want to be a leader? And is it because as a classroom teacher, I can influence 20 kids, and as a leader, I can influence 200 people. And okay, that for me is the big thing. But if it's the title's nice, the paycheck's nice, I get my own parking spot. That's the ego. And therefore, are you going to be the type of leader who thinks they already know everything?
Well, Simon Sinek talks about this idea of exactly what you're talking about is it's not about you, like the fancy parking spot, the fancy coffee cups, having somebody deliver coffee to you every day, the office, the cushy chair, the privileges. They're not for you. They're the position. So when you no longer have them, did you hear that talk where he talks about the former minister of defense or whatever that flew economy class the following year to a conference to speak, whereas the year before he was the keynote speaker brought in and given the red carpet treatment, right? And his lesson was, these things aren't for you. They're just your title, right? Yeah. And going back to that idea of what you just said is, it's not about you. You're always going to be given these privileges and, with the title and the fancy office. But at the end of the day, the leaders who are going to move organizations forward are the ones that are in the trenches with the teachers day in and day out. They make difficult decisions, but they lean on the people they lead to co-construct what's possible. And then they make the most informed decisions necessary to empower all people in the organization, right?
Yeah. Yeah, most definitely. And I think it's that we were at the BSME conference. When was it? A couple of months ago. And one of the things that really resonated with me talking about that is about being touchable as a leader, being touchable. And we've talking back again about these international schools that we work in and these wonderful foyers that you come into. And it's like, well, how do I get access to the school leaders? How do I get access to the principal, or what is sometimes titled the CEO? It's like, you're a teacher, you're a leader of a school. Why CEO? That dumbfounded me.
Yeah.
But it's like, you're sitting behind how many doors? And then I can't get to, because then there's you've got your PA or you there, and I don't have a booking appointment. Okay. So how often am I going to see you around the school? How often are you out being touchable, as it were, where a member of staff or a student can come and speak to you, can come and, have those conversations with you? And that for me is a big thing, because it's too easy to kind of go, I've got this meeting, or I've got this work to do, I've got to do this, and be sat, doors closed, and not being out in the corridor, being out in the hallway, going back to the skateboarding teacher that you talked about, who is, I think he really embodies like the notion of being touchable. And I think that goes some way, like you say, about diminishing the title and having the leadership influence that you want around the school, because you're having those conversations, you're seeing things happen in real time firsthand, and it almost removes the title to put you on an even keel, because you're eating with the kids, or you're in the corridors, you're seeing them, you're walking, you're talking, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's Mr. like just your surname. It might even be first name. That's what I read an interesting article on, actually. Yes, it was yesterday. Barry Cooper on LinkedIn. Was talking about removing the title and trusting students with your name. And some schools do that, I think, already. But it was a post. It literally went, "Hi, my name's Barry," and he said that was one of the first things that potentially he would remove, is the Mr. or head teacher of this or principal of that. It would just be, no, you just call me. I trust you with my name. And I thought that's a really powerful statement to have. Because so often or not, even for me in the schools I'd worked in previous, like boys' grammar schools in the UK, it's like, sir, yes, there's a teacher enters the classroom, you stand up. You cannot take your blazers off unless the order is given by the head of school. Short sleeve order. You can roll your sleeves up, type of thing. And it still has a place. Don't get me wrong, I think sometimes it still has a place, but it's the two opposing parts there. I find that quite interesting.
Well, that's what the aviation industry did when Korean Airlines had a number of disasters. They realized through reviewing the black box recordings that the pilots in command were not challenged, could not be challenged by the co-pilots.
Yeah,
because you don't challenge your senior. Colombian Airlines, the same thing. When they crashed in New York right after 9/11, a few months after, Colombian airliner went down in Bronx or something like that and wiped out a whole neighborhood. And in reviewing the black box recordings, the head pilot, the captain, was not listening to the co-pilots. So the co-pilots didn't say directly, "We're running out of fuel, Captain. We're running out of fuel. We need to land." They bounced around and said, not sure how much longer we can fly with the fuel we have. And then it was too late. Korean Airlines, same thing. So what they did was they took away all titles. They stripped everybody from a title, and you had to call each other by their first name. So if you and I are flying a jumbo jet and you're the captain, well, you're Alex. And I'm saying, "Alex, you know what? We're flying low. We're flying low. I really think we need to increase our altitude." And then I'm allowed to say that to you and challenge you, and I'll use your first name. So we're taking this power structure away in order to function at our best. So that's what you're describing in that situation. And An article I wrote on LinkedIn a couple years ago was a research study done to say that the most impactful, it was talking about this idea, do public shoutouts work? And it was about leaders who get up and I want to give a shout out to so-and-so for doing this week. Awesome job. Round of applause. I want to give a shout out to this person over here because you did a great job this week. I saw you doing a great job. Awesome job. And the public shout outs actually don't work in terms of motivating staff. They turn people off because you can't get to everybody. Then people feel as though they're not seen and valued if you don't give them a public shout out. So the research study that was done was the power of the 7 to 9 second informal interaction. So I'm a leader walking down the hallway and I see you and I go, "Hey, Alex, thank you so much last week. You know, you spent so much extra time for parent teacher conferences. I know you stayed late the whole week. I saw you really engage with parents when I walked by. I really appreciate you and the effort you're making. I just wanted to let you know." It has to be genuine. It can't be phony, but it has to be something about your contribution and what you actually did. And that the power of the 7 to 9 second or 9 to 12 second, whatever it was, interaction by far outweighed the public shout outs. That means leaders need to be seen. They need to be out. They need to be connecting with people. And they need to be, even though they're uncomfortable, maybe one-to-one me giving you praise, because giving you praise, like there's a sense of vulnerability there because I'm suddenly making it about you and not my power status.
Yeah.
Right. So I was really moved by that article and I really embraced it in my coaching work. And, even with students, the power of the quick interaction, just to let them know they're seen. I see you. I know who you are. I know what you're doing. And that goes a long way.
Yeah. Someone I'd spoken to on the podcast in the last 6 weeks actually made a very similar point about student shout-outs that I'd never thought about. And it was the assembly. You know, when we're given student awards and it's like everyone, the student gets an award, they come up, that public shout-out. And he said, have you ever stopped to think about whether the student's own integrity and whether they want to be up there in front of everyone? Have you taken the time to ask those students? He's like, hey, we're going to do this today, guys. Are you happy to come up and collect these awards? Are you happy to be stood up in front of your peers? I've never, and I thought, oh my God, like I've never once stopped to think a student wouldn't want to come and collect, wouldn't want to be. And it really changed my mindset and how I view this now as a head of sixth form, of when we give assemblies and anything like this beforehand, to go, hey, we're going to be doing these things. Do you want me to call it out in assembly and have it up, or are you quite happy just we'll do it now? And sometimes it's like, no, it's fine. Like public recognition, this is a big deal. And other times I've had students go, oh, thanks for asking. So actually, can we? I'm not really bothered about it. It's like, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's a very simple thing, but it's one of those, just changes complete perspective of the interaction of, it doesn't need to be in public. There's a time and place sometimes, but most of the time it's like, no, actually we're just those quick 10 seconds. Hey, just to say, look, this, I've been told this, got an email about this. This is fantastic. Well done. This is a great achievement. Have a little conversation, and then they're happy with that. It doesn't need to be all singing or dancing. And that for me really struck a chord. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And, as we segue to a close, I want to get your take on this, is that idea of anybody listening to this who's a parent. Obviously, we'll have a lot of educators listening to this, but, what is your advice in particular to parents when it comes to really looking at their kids, providing their kids with what they need to be successful? But what is your advice to parents listening to this when it comes to really unpacking the conditions necessary for their child, their son or daughter, to perform at their best? Like, where can parents take that, and how can they best support their child or children as they're trying to navigate the complexities of life and school and AI and social media? Like, what would your advice be to any parent listening to this, regardless of culture? What do you think you would say to them?
That is a really good question and a very tricky one, because I think the first thing I would say is context is king with this, and that every home scenario will have a different context. And every child, strengths and enjoyment and different things will, again, be different for all these students. I think the key thing from my side would be, I hear a lot of people talk about, address the North Star and work with your child to try and establish what their North Star is. And in terms of, the term is the highest good. And I've heard this a lot. Talk to me a little bit about what do they think is important. And some students will go, grades are important, I need to get this. And there's always that shift of, well, what happens if you don't get that? Are you a failure? And we could have talked about embracing failures when we talked about leadership, and it's one of the key things. We know this, but failure is a good thing. There's great podcasts, How to Fail, if you've ever come across it. And that's really helped me. And I think I talk to my own kids about this, and I talk to my students at school about this, in that failure is a part of learning. You can't have one without the other. And failure is a part of success, to help you appreciate these things and to be reflective and truly develop and move forward. And so I think from a parent's perspective, it would be embrace failure. Embrace those parts where you make mistakes, where your kids make mistakes, and even you as a parent make mistakes. Because, God, I've got my own 2 kids and I get it wrong.
How old are they?
They are 11 and 9.
Oh, okay.
So one of them is about to start secondary, year 7 in September. And, I think having that open conversation with them to establish more about their character, I think more about them as a person, not about their successes, as it were. Focus on not the things they achieve, but the development of them as a person. Because everyone's different. Like, I'll give you the example. I grew up playing in sports. Sports was always a big part of me. And even in the last 10 years, even though I retired, one of those things I identified as is, like, I would say, I'm a rugby player, I'm a sports, I'm athletic. It's part of my identity. And we see this with parents all the time, in that you can push your own identity onto your children, and that I want my children to be great at sports. Anything, I want them to be great at sports. And I was having this conversation with my wife the other day, and it's like, my daughter, my youngest is 9, was at football, and she doesn't go there because she wants to be great at football. She goes there because she enjoys it and she wants to socialize. Is she happy? Yes. Am I happy? No. But I then have to take the step back and go, but this is not about me. Mm-hmm. And I say to my own 2, this is about me. My job as a dad is to help you become the best person you can be. That's what I say to them. And they know that. And sometimes that means I have to hold you accountable for things because you're still learning and developing. And sometimes I'm going to point you on a path, and other times I'm going to send you out into the sea to swim, and I'm going to see how you do. That's a metaphor, by the way. I'm not literally.
Yeah, of course.
But there's people out there listening. Like, oh my God. But I'm going to stand on the shore and I'm going to send you out. And it's being present as a parent enough to have those moments. And I, for one, can go, sometimes, you know what, I get being present wrong. I'm busy with work, or I'm doing this. And so going back to it, it's, if you can get those things and speak to your kids about, what's your North Star, guys? What is it about how you treat people, your character, your things you enjoy? How can we develop this, there's attributes, the skills, the fun things, all these different parts, and make you a good person, and make you appreciate and value the things, and make you understand and put you in situations where you develop resilience. You know, those are the things would be the key characteristics to success, because everyone has a different measurement of success. But if you as a parent can make a good person who understands morals, ethics, who understands how to treat, you know, the person next to them or the person in front of them, and understands right and wrong, that for me, I think is the biggest attributes, rather than purely going, well, that's a B. Well, what's wrong with that? What's a B? It's not an A. And sometimes there can be a time and a place for that, going, well, effort and talking about the failure and going, well, why is that then? Is it important? And let's reflect on the things we did, and let's reflect on, do we need to change anything? Let's reflect on, is there something you misunderstood? How can I help? Rather than B is a failure, B is not good enough. And unfortunately, with certain cultures, and we have this within the country I'm in Dubai, in the UAE, and around the world, but in certain cultures, it's like, if you don't hit that standard, then it's unacceptable. Then you're not good enough. It's like
conditional positive regard. You're accepted if you produce the A or you do well. If you don't, then you're not. And yeah, I really appreciate your insight there. And sometimes I wish I was my own parent when I was young, because the way that I kind of parent and teach and coach now is through that lens, and I didn't have that growing up. I was very much left to my own devices. I was an athlete as well. I played American football, and I talked about this idea of, American football saved my life because I lost a brother to drug addiction. I lost a brother to suicide. And for me, I found team sport, and I found American football, and that gave me hope and purpose and meaning, and taught me discipline and commitment and connection, and the value of brotherhood. When I say brotherhood, I just mean that sense of camaraderie amongst a member of a team. And then what comes up when you described what you just did, going off to let them swim in the sea on their own as a metaphor, and then stepping back and being there to rescue them if you need to. But I came across a term, obviously we know helicopter parenting is like hovering over your child, making sure that they're okay. Are you okay? Are you okay? I don't want you to fail. I want to protect your feelings. Whereas Zamboni parenting, have you ever heard of Zamboni parenting?
I think I have.
Yeah. So Zamboni, the machine that cleans the ice between periods in an ice hockey game.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So the Zamboni comes out during the intermission and smooths out the ice. It has this kind of moppy little feature behind that pulls all the snow off and smooths out the ice. So Zamboni parenting is, I want to take away all of your hardship.
Yeah.
I want you to have a smooth ride. I don't want you to, have anything bumpy along the way. And a lot of that now comes from a lack of growing up. So I didn't have that. I needed that. I didn't get it. Now I want to create the conditions for you to thrive. So I really care deeply about you. I love you. And I want to take away all your obstacles. And the best parents out there, and the best educators and the best leaders throw them out to sea to swim on their own, and are there for them, and will intervene when necessary. But you got to do it on your own. I just sent 2 boys off to university this year. So we moved from Saudi to Belgium, changed countries, changed jobs, empty nesting, all at once. And it was extremely stressful. I thought I was equipped to deal with stress. I coach people around dealing with stress, and I thought I had the tools to do it. And I'm glad I do have the tools to do it, because it made it a little bit easier, but I was thrown into the fire all of a sudden. So, you got to let the kids go out there and experience failure. And both of my boys have experienced failure and hardship. And all I tell them at the end of the day is like, have your North Star, like you said, know why you're doing what you're doing. And if what you're doing is not for you, it's okay.
Yeah.
We will support you. What's most important is finding the purpose and meaning needed in your life, to know that there is an optimistic future. Optimistic doesn't mean fluffy, positive thinking. Optimism means that we know good stuff is out there, but we've got to double down on the hard work necessary to do what we have to do to put ourselves in the best position possible to achieve success. and with that will be failure. So that kind of dovetails nicely with what you said in terms of that would be my advice to parents. But my advice would also be double click on your own relationship with success and failure. What was success and failure like for you growing up? What was your relationship with authority like, starting with your parents? Did you grow up in a fear-based culture where you couldn't make mistakes? What was your relationship with your teachers? The same thing. Like, was it based on fear or was it based on openness? And really learn that about yourself in order to have the best conversations necessary with your children.
Yeah. I think that is a great place to end as well. A great place to end. So Andy, really, really thoroughly enjoyed this, first conversation. I'm hopeful we're going to be able to have some more across this year as well. I think there's lots more things we could have talked about and I think have the opportunity to talk about as we move forward. But just want to say a massive thanks for reaching out and setting this up as well. It's been enjoyable. And I hope the listeners from both sets of podcast audience have enjoyed this and taken something away from it as well. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. And, I really appreciate this. Is the first time we've actually spoken, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we've connected on social media, but I just want to let you know what I appreciate about you. And I really appreciate you have a calm way, a very reflective way to carry on a conversation and to think about, what you're going to say in a very thoughtful way, in a very calm way and an open way. And I'm sure that is manifested in your life as a father and a husband and as an educator. And that's a really important skill to have. So, thanks for your time. And where can my listeners find you?
So they can find me on YouTube. They can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We are the International Classroom Podcast. LinkedIn, I think I post daily, try and post daily, if not every other day on LinkedIn as well, and add value and trying to build bridges with educators and people around the world to provide things that maybe they've not heard of and seen. So on that sense, we put clips out for LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok. We're on Substack as well, write articles on a lot of the things we discuss in the podcast.
What?
Substack.
What's that? So
Substack is a platform for writing.
Wow.
So a lot of educators now I'm starting to see a shift onto Substack. It's a really, really good platform. You can put audio parts, you can put video parts, but generally just for writing. So all of the articles that I write are based on Substack. And I try and talk a lot and write a lot about some of the key pillars from the podcast. So I think last week was Empathy Week. So did a lot of talking, writing on some of the pillars from
awesome.
Ed Kerman's from there. So yeah, they can find me there. That would be great. And for my listeners and for my audience, Andy, where's the best place for them to find you?
Yeah, thanks for that. So you can find me on Run Your Life podcast, Andy Vasily. Just look at that and you'll find my podcast, which is on all the major podcast players. I'm not on YouTube. You and I talked about that. I don't use YouTube yet for my podcast. I will get there eventually. I'm really, I'm still on Twitter, X, I'm not doing as much there. So, but I'm still there, but mostly LinkedIn as well. I do a lot of leadership articles and well-being and flourishing articles on LinkedIn. And share a lot of work there. So that's basically where you can find me. So Alex, I'll let you close off the show. But again, thanks for your time and maybe we can do this again.
Most definitely. Andy, it's been an absolute pleasure. So thank you and enjoy the rest of your day there in Budapest. Thanks again to Lumia by Smart Technologies, our podcast sponsor. You can transform your classroom into an interactive, student-centered learning environment today. Visit aliwem.io to find out how.